You are listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com. You like films. You want to track what you've seen. Maybe make some lists. Perhaps find recommendations, give recommendations, write reviews. What service do you use? Are any of them really the full package? And if so, which one is it? Is it IMDb, Letterboxd, I Check Movies, maybe Criticker, Flickchart, Rate Your Music perhaps? Yeah, there's quite a few, but all are not equal. Two options have really come through as perhaps the most used and known. The established IMDb, the ultimate film database with decades of history, and the newer, hotter, sleeker Letterboxd, sure to bring in the younger crowd. And the question really is, which of these are better? And can you really stick to just one of them? Oh, and just how many accounts do we have in total? How many of these film tracking websites do we actually use? You may be surprised. So, as always, I'm Chris, but in this episode, we will not really be talking images as much as we'll be talking websites, features, statistics, even prices, and so much more. Oh, and just to add a disclaimer, this episode is by no means sponsored by IMDb, Letterboxd, or any other services, though we may have accepted bribes if they were actually offered. So let's bring in my three absolutely wonderful and quite possibly website-addicted co-hosts and just start with the easiest question of them all, or perhaps the hardest. Do you actually know how many film tracking websites you are a member of? And we can probably start in alphabetical order with you, Mathieu.
Hi, Chris. So in terms of film websites I'm a member of, I guess it must be like 7 or something. But in terms of those where I'm actually active, it's 5, right? It's IMDb, Letterboxd, I Check Movies, Criticker, and Allociné. Right, those are the 5 I use regularly.
What about you, Sol?
Coming off that, I feel like I don't use that many websites. I only use 3, which is IMDb, I Check Movies, and Letterboxd. But even just using 3, I've had people tell me that's absolutely nuts because they only want to use one service. So 3 does sound like a lot, but after what Mature said about 5, maybe it's not that many.
To get to our third host, Tom, do you know how many film websites you're actually a member of?
Chris, yes, I'm a member of 4 film websites that I use regularly. Every time I watch a film, I visit each of these sites to check it and maybe read about the film. So obviously it's IMDb and Letterboxd, and then I also use I Check Movies and Flickchart. So that keeps me busy after every time I watch a film. And how many film websites do you use, Chris?
Well, if we're talking about film websites I check after every film, it's actually just 2, and one of them is not Letterboxd, it's IMDb and I Check Movies. I'm on Letterboxd, and I really like Letterboxd, but I still haven't imported my ratings there, so that's one place I don't rate. I mainly make lists, and I check reviews and recommendations and things like that. And I've been telling myself for probably a year at least now that I need to get set up properly on that Letterboxd, but it just, that little effort of actually importing all of my ratings, I still haven't found the motivation for that. In total, I'm probably a member of at least 5, but I went to Criticker this morning, which I know I have a profile on, and I tried to log in, I couldn't, and I tried to recover my password and it didn't recognize my email. So I have no idea what email I signed up on, or if it's some old email I had when like 15 years ago or something like that. So I guess at this point I'm locked out of all but 3. So a realistic number would be 3. Though I do also know I had a Flickchart account at some point.
I might just point out, you don't have to import all your ratings to use Letterboxd. I never imported all of my ratings when I started using it. I'm just using it to log what I'm doing as I'm doing it. So I've got all my reviews archived there. But I've not imported all my ratings. And actually, I don't intend to either, because some of them are films that I haven't seen in 20 years. So I would much rather go back and rewatch those and then log those on Letterboxd. And I don't mind that it's an incomplete profile of what I've seen. I just find it a useful way of archiving my reviews.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So for you, Letterboxd, despite being so hot, new and sleek, it's just an archive.
Yes, it's a giant archive, and it's an archive which I can access very easily on my phone. So wherever I am, I can look at one of my old reviews, and it's awesome, and it's much better than having them saved on my laptop.
Yeah, that's very true. And I really like the review setup at Letterboxd too. So I think that, just to give your account a shout out, I think you review actually essentially every single film you watch, right? So on Letterboxd, essentially every single one. So if people are interested in following you, they can just go there and just get your opinion on essentially everything, right?
Yeah, that's correct. I write a review for every film that I watch, which is 44 minutes or longer. So on Letterboxd, I've got reviews for every single feature-length film that I've seen since December 2019.
I honestly don't know how you do it, Sol, because I've tried your approach, and I've maybe last 2 to 3 months of writing a review of every film that I see, but it just gets too much at some point, and I find myself falling behind in writing reviews. So I'm always impressed that you managed to stick it out, and I wish I had that same archive that you had, so it would help me, remember everything that I watched. So yeah, great work to do there, Sol.
Thanks, Tom.
Yeah, I'm jealous actually, because I would love to have energy to just do the same thing, write a mini review for every single film I watch. It would be so helpful, especially for his podcast as well, for any further discussion on any film. I could just go back and check, and I do not have that. So maybe I'll be able to do that at some point, but it doesn't look like it's going to happen anytime soon.
I'd probably also just mention that while I do a review for every film, they're not particularly long reviews. Most of my reviews, because I was actually intrigued by it, so I did a check about it at some point. Most of my reviews are between 150 and 160, 165 characters, so they're not very long reviews. And I do find when I go through it, Chris and Tom, both of you write quite lengthy reviews. So I guess maybe because my reviews are much shorter and they're pretty much instant reaction immediately after watching it, I suppose I find it a bit more manageable. I don't always have the energy to, I guess, as such, but I somehow manage to do it as part of my routine, I guess, after watching a film, try and write up something short about it.
I try to do the same, Saul, but the problem is I always fall behind, like Tom described. I do catch up, so I do have every film for this year at least reviewed so far, but sometimes I review them like 2 weeks after, so it's those are not very in-depth reviews, unfortunately.
I just want to jump back in and just correct something. I said 150 characters, and no, that's not correct. It's 150 words. 150 to 165 words are not characters. I'm not one of those Twitter people who write in abbreviated sentences with all weird, acronyms and everything. No, they're actually proper reviews, not as lengthy as the ones that Tom and Chris usually write.
But I think, Chris, you mentioned one of the big appealing parts of that is the archive, right? Is being able to go back and see what you wrote shortly after watching a film. That is so valuable. That's why I try my best to do it, right? Because it's so frustrating when I go back and see a film I've seen and try to find a review and there is none.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, maybe this will be our wake-up call. Maybe soon we'll all be on Letterboxd writing mini reviews of 150 words. Maybe we can try and do it, Tom. But to move a little bit from reviews, that's something that IMDb certainly has, but not really Isaac movies, certainly not Flickchart. But to move back to one of the main uses of these websites, which is tracking. How do you track films? Why do you track films? And how would you say the film tracking websites you use differ? So IMDb, Letterboxd, Isaac movies, what are the different purposes of tracking films on these websites for you?
Like Tom described, whenever I see a film, I log into all of those websites, the 5 I mentioned, and immediately log the film. Though I think Letterboxd is the only one that I really use for tracking in the sense of the dates where I watched it. I also put in a tag that says how I watched it, whether or the reason why.
Ooh. Ooh, interesting.
And I guess for me, because I'm a more recent cinephile than you guys, for me, Letterboxd was there from the beginning. When I started really being into movies, I immediately used Letterboxd because I had heard about it through this podcast, Film Spotting. I guess for me, tracking film is part of my cinephilia, I guess, because I like making lists, as I think you all do. And yeah, it's something it's kind of a ritual, I guess, which is very pleasant, I suppose. I'm not sure why, but it is in a way part of why I watch movies, I guess. It's a little sad to say.
IMDb is a site which I guess I use to log films with a rating. Although I do have to say that when I first used IMDb, I didn't actually rate movies. I just used the message boards there when they existed, and I kept all my ratings in a separate document. And it wasn't until a few years into things that IMDb opened it up and gave the option to make your ratings public. At that stage, I started adding my ratings in, and it took me actually quite a few days because at that time, I'd probably only seen a couple of thousand films, but, it was still a bit of a task to put it all in. But I entered in all the data retroactively because being able to have your ratings public and being able to compare it against other people was just incredibly interesting. But before that, I actually had no real desire to put my ratings in. Since then, and it's got to the stage where I've seen more and more films, it is interesting to have my ratings in IMDb because I'm able to do power searches or advanced searches, I think that's what's called these days. And using the advanced search, I can sort by films that I've seen or films that I haven't seen based on filters. So primarily, that'll be the reason why I rated IMDb would be not so much to have a collection of ratings because I've got that anyway in a separate Word document, but to be able to do advanced searches. With iCheck Movies, the original attraction of that, like Matthew has said, was being able to have a date on it. So you'll be able to date where you visit the page and without doing any fancy stuff, because it's very hard to find on IMDb. Without finding any fancy stuff, you can actually see the date that you've rated a film on iCheck Movies. So that was very novel, plus being able to see the list progress. These days, I don't think I really use iCheck Movies that much. I'm probably using it more out of force of habit because Letterboxd does what iCheck Movies does for me in terms of being able to give me a date on which I've seen a film so I could search by date. However, Letterboxd does have a better option for adding in reviews and archiving reviews, so I mostly use it as a review archive. As I said earlier on, I've not uploaded all my ratings to Letterboxd, so in terms of searching there for films that I've seen or haven't seen, IMDb is still the go-to for me. But yeah, basically I use Letterboxd as an archive. I use maybe iCheck Movies to easily see things by date, and I use IMDb to do advanced searches.
So I started out using IMDb when I first got into films, primarily to rate what I'd seen and just keep track of the films I'd seen. And that eventually expanded into iCheck Movies once I'd worked through the IMDb Top 250 and I wanted to look and explore other lists that are out there and find new films that were interested to me. And then I think Flickchart and Letterboxd came probably around a similar time for me. Flickchart, basically because it enables you to list all the films you've ever seen in preference order of how you rated them. And I think that's a great tool. The website itself isn't particularly brilliant, but just to have all the films I've ever seen ranked in a specific order, it's far clearer on that website than, for instance, on IMDb or Letterboxd, because you can filter them by rating, but then, there's disparity between all the films you've rated as 7, so it's nice to have them in a specific order on Flickchart. But I do love the advanced search that is on Letterboxd. It's great, a really great feature, and it's just nice to be able to quickly find certain films in a certain genre that you rated above it, a certain rating, and things like that to help you compile lists.
Since I don't rate films on Letterboxd yet, that's the one thing I don't know that much about. So if the filters on Letterboxd are as great as IMDb, I might eventually move all my ratings over because IMDb has essentially just been dying for a while. It feels like Letterboxd, especially in terms of the movies I'm interested in, has a greater community of more active film buffs, I guess. But for me, the reason why I rate on IMDb and iCheck Movies is that IMDb, at least to me, has always been the ultimate film database. I use the advanced search all the time. You know what, Tom? Since I don't rate anything on Letterboxd, that's the one thing I really don't have an opinion on. So I've been considering for a long time whether or not I should just switch from IMDb to Letterboxd, because Letterboxd in so many ways feels better. It feels like the ratings are slightly closer to mine. It feels like the type of films I like have more ratings, so you get more data. But the one thing always holding me back was that I thought the IMDb advanced search was so fantastic that I wasn't sure if Letterboxd would be able to copy it. So if the advanced search on Letterboxd is just as good as IMDb, I might just take that extra trouble to import my ratings, because that sounds really great. I mean, the reason why I rate films or track films on both IMDb and iCheck Movies is because on IMDb you really have that advanced search that you can just do anything. You can find films, you can find recommendations, or you can use it to essentially sort through your rating history by genre, by anything, and easily be able to create lists and get an overview. So I just think that the IMDb advanced search is pretty much the main reason why I rate films to begin with. It's just the perfect history and ability to rate and organize anything by almost any category. On iCheck Movies, on the other hand, I never really cared about the date. That's not that important to me. The reason why I use iCheck Movies is because it's such an easy list tracking service. So if you want to see how many movies I've seen on each list without checking it manually every time, just having my viewings logged there, I can just instantly see it. So it's like a time-saving exercise. And here too, I don't think Letterboxd is set up quite the same way. It's not that list focused. It's not as easy to immediately see what you've seen and what you've not seen in the specific order, etc. So that's the reason why I still use iCheck Movies, even though like it's the same for me. So I've used it less and less.
So in terms of the advanced search, I wouldn't say Letterboxd has that. I think IMDb does have the best advanced search, really detailed, right? Letterboxd does have filters that are pretty useful, but it's not quite as precise, I would say. However, the lists are, you can pretty easily see what you've seen on a list. It's not as list focused though as EM. Certainly you don't have anything like the progress page where you see a bunch of lists all together and your progress really easily, I guess. And I should add, because you guys mentioned a bit more why you use such and such websites for the other ones I use, right? IMDb I use just because I had heard of IMDb before being a cinephile, right? It's pretty well known. I think I started using it a little later, actually rating films on it, because I figured, it appears to be the basis for everything else where you can import from IMDb, so I guess I might as well use it. But I really only use it for that. It's one of the ones I use the least. Critiker I started using much later, and it was a whole amount of work to figure out my ratings on it, because you can't really import them that easily. Or at least you couldn't at that time. But I really like having the more nuance in your ratings on Critiker. I think their recommendation system is not bad. It's the only website that does that well, I feel. And I guess I like seeing what it predicts. It predicts your score for a film before you rate it. And I think it's fun to see when it's wrong. I don't know. I get enjoyment out of that. And yeah, the French one I use, Allociné, is basically very similar to IMDb. It's basically kind of an IMDb clone, at least initially. But what I use it for mostly is that I see a lot of films in theaters, and Allociné has a lot of information about that. It's basically the easiest way to see, showings for multiple theaters. And when you have a bunch of theaters available, it's very useful. I also rate films on there because while I'm on there, I might as well. But yeah, that's why I mostly use it. And one thing I should add to the insanity is that I also keep track by hand. I write it down, the films I see every, the date, etc. So I guess I have a double copy of it in case, I don't know, Letterboxd goes down one day.
Fair enough. I guess my next question might be the hardest. And I mean, if you had to only pick one film tracking website, would it be IMDb or Letterboxd, or perhaps some of the others you mentioned?
I guess if I had to pick one to exist, it might be Allociné, right? Just because of the practical aspect for it. But in terms of actual tracking and the actual website, how I use it, it's definitely Letterboxd by a mile. It's just very pleasing in terms of the design of it. I enjoy looking at the stats and all that. I think it's just the most pleasing to spend time on, I guess.
Yeah, I have to second that in terms of IMDb versus Letterboxd. If I had to choose one of them and I was only availability on one, I would definitely choose Letterboxd. Even if it meant having to re-import all my ratings in there, just everything's more useful. The all-time stats are awesome. I know it's just a pro feature, so you have to pay to get it, but the all-time stats are awesome. But even beyond that, the biggest advantage for me for Letterboxd over IMDb is you can sort by streaming services because it's connected to Just Watch. That's also a pro thing. So you'd have to pay to use it, but whatever. If I had to choose for either having a free IMDb account or a paid Letterboxd account, I'd choose the paid Letterboxd account. It's worth it. It's awesome being able to filter different lists and see what's available in your streaming services. And it's not just on all your services. You can choose one service in particular. You can choose ones where you can rent it, where it's just available for streaming. And it's incredibly useful. I find that when I'm doing my watch lists for each month for the challenges on the ICM forum, I mainly rely on Letterboxd. So I go to Letterboxd, I see if it's available there, and if it's available on one of my streaming services there, I'll be able to add it to my watch list. It's much easier than going through an IMDb advanced search, and then I'm going to copy that into Google and then see if it's streaming where I want it to be streaming. So Letterboxd, I think, is much more user-friendly. It doesn't have all the advanced features of IMDb, which we might get into later on. So if we want to do a super advanced search, it's going to fail me there. But in terms of what I use it for, Letterboxd is far more useful.
I think this is a really tough call. I love both sides almost equally. I mean, I've been using IMDb for much longer, and it's become my go-to website for checking any films I'm interested in. You know, if someone mentions a film, I don't visit Letterboxd to find out about it. I go straight to IMDb. I like having a scan through all the different sections, maybe looking at some reviews, etc. But then, as Sol mentioned with Letterboxd, it has this amazing feature which enables you to filter films on your watch list by streaming service. And that for me is an absolute godsend because it's such a brilliant feature. I've got a watch list of thousands of films, and picking something to watch by just going on a streaming service can prove quite difficult. But if you can filter that down and say you fancy to watch a horror film from the 80s, you can just filter your watch list by horror films made in the 80s, available on your specific streaming services. And I just think that's an excellent feature. It saves you so much time. And it also allows me to check streaming services that I'm not subscribed to and see which films they have available. And that may encourage me to use others or have a trial of those services. So I do think that's a brilliant feature. So I'm kind of torn here between which one I'd choose. I don't think I can choose because they're both equally as important to me. Oh, and Sol mentioned that some of the features on Letterboxd that are only available to pro users. I think because I got in as one of the early users to Letterboxd on the beta service, I get quite a few of the pro features for free. They've always been there on my account, so I've got that Just Watch connection and other things. So it's proved pretty useful for me. But if I didn't have them, I imagine I'd certainly pay for pro because I couldn't do without that now.
I'm a bit curious about this. When did you start using it? When did that website start?
I can't recall the exact time, but I think I found it through Twitter. I was quite active on Twitter, maybe, I don't know, around 2009, 2010. It might have even been a bit before then.
I just Googled 2011 it started.
Ah, right, okay, yeah. So I'd obviously been on Twitter for a while and connected with a number of cinephiles. So when Letterboxd came out, there was a bit of a buzz, and I remember signing up to it quite early. And I didn't use it that much at first, but over time, as the site progressed and improved, then I've found myself using it a lot more.
Yeah, I'm envious now. I remember those beta adverts popping up several places, and I thought, no, there's just no way this service could get better than IMDb. It's just pointless for me to sign up. I don't need another website. And now I'm really regretting that. It would have been really nice to have those pro features. That would definitely have imported my ratings then. To the overall question, just for selfish reasons, I might have picked IMDb simply because, like I said, I still haven't imported my ratings. But if I had the time to import my ratings first, I might go with Letterboxd. I would need to see those filter features first, though, because, like I said, the advanced search feature on IMDb is one thing I use so much.
I'm just curious, Chris. So The advanced search on IMDb, what kind of things are you searching for? Obviously, I gave my example of Letterboxd of, wanting to watch a certain horror film from a certain decade, etc. What do you usually search for on IMDb?
Both in terms of what films I might want to watch and in terms of my own ratings. So most of our regular listeners will know we do quite a lot of polls on the ICM forum, from yearly lists to any kind of genre lists. And for all of those polls, I will go in and create the list from the advanced search, because then I can immediately rank the films by my ratings and just create a list on IMDb as well, and it's ready to vote. So that's one of the main purposes I use it for. And then I also use it just to find films. I like to watch films from like a specific area, region, time, etc. at the same time if I really get into something. So if I want to, I don't know, watch a bunch of East German films, so find the biggest East German films from the 1950s, I can immediately do that on IMDb. Same with any other country, region, director, etc. So it's really easy. It's the same if I want to see how I rated the films of a specific director or the films of an actor, how many of them I've seen. I can also almost immediately do that on IMDb. The only issue there is that they don't have searches for the specific role. So for instance, if there's an actor director, I'll get everything they were ever in. But there's so many good usages of advanced search.
I might just mention, because it's come up in conversation now, list making. I forgot to mention it before, but that's probably one of the main reasons why I've still got an iCheck Movies account, aside from getting dated information when I've seen films. We do a lot of polls on the forum, like Chris mentioned, and we have to submit it as either an IMDb list or an iCheck Movies list. And iCheck Movies lists are amazing. They're easy to sort because you've got drag and drop, so you can move things up and down. With IMDb, they used to have drag and drop, and then they couldn't be bothered with it, so they got rid of it. So now you have to number boxes and then resort, and then you have to remove things. You have to click to remove, then refreshes the list. It's an absolute nightmare. I hate doing lists on IMDb. The only lists that I do on IMDb these days are for the director poll, because you can't do film personnel lists on iCheck Movies. But quite aside from that, I have done some lists on Letterboxd, and Letterboxd has got drag and drop, very similar to iCheck Movies. So list making for me is another reason why I prefer Letterboxd over IMDb.
Well, that's a good point, actually. And I'm slightly torn there, because while drag and drop is really good for short lists, I actually quite like the number element on IMDb for longer lists. So all-time favorites, any list that goes over 100 items, essentially, it's really easy to just type in the number instead of consistently, adding a film which lands in the bottom and then dragging it all the way up and doing it again. Now with IMDb, I can just write in the number on 50 films and they'll jump up essentially where I want them.
You can actually drag films to the middle of a list on iCheck Movies as well as on Letterboxd, so they don't have to land at the bottom. They can land wherever you want them to land in the list.
And you can also enter a number. I mean, you can definitely do that. On Letterboxd anyway. I don't think you can on iCheck Movies.
Yeah, you can't on iCheck Movies, I think.
It's interesting because when I make lists on IMDb, I open up my flip chart and search the films by order and then type them in one by one, so I don't need to do any dragging or dropping or reordering because I'm just doing it. I mean, maybe that's a long-winded way anyway, but it's just interesting to hear how everyone approaches making lists quite differently.
I signed up to Flickchart, but it just feels like so much work. It's an interesting idea, but essentially what you do, right, is that every time you watch a film, you add it in and you compare it to 10 films or so, just to see where it lands in your list, and then you have a list, essentially a ranked list of every single film you've ever seen. It's interesting, but yeah, I guess I just never got into it. So what's the best usages of that website for you?
Specifically for list making, it just makes it easier. So say we're doing a poll on the best films from the 1960s. On IMDb, if you filtered by films you've seen in the 1960s, you've got all your 10s, all your 9s, all your 8s, but they're not in any order. So you've got to engage with the films and think where they're going to be placed. But Flipchart's automatically got them in the order I like them. So it just makes it so much easier for that. But I agree that it's a difficult website to get into, because if you haven't got into it towards the start of your film watching journey, then you've potentially got to go back and rate thousands of films to get them in the order you want, you couldn't import because it's not how it works, it's not how it's set up for. So it is a very useful film site, but if I hadn't have got into it when I did, I don't think I'd have the time or energy to do it from the start now.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think I would ever be able to get into that unless they actually add an import. But just to double check, where is the number option on Letterboxd? Because I logged into one of my lists and I don't see it. I just see the X and the drag and drop icon. So where is the area where you can add a number to a film and just see it jump up?
You can. I just tried it over there. I just tried adding Parasite to one of my lists, and it put it in as 50 or 51 at the bottom of the list. But when
where is this option?
Well, I've got a list which is open at the moment, and it's like my filter top 50, and I added a film there, I added Parasite, I put it at the bottom, and it came up with 51, and then I highlighted the 51, and I changed the 51 to 42, and it automatically moved it up. Tom is saying it might be a pro feature because Tom's got every feature.
Oh, okay, yeah, I see now. Yes, okay, understood. So you have to make the ranked list. Thank you, Zal. Now I know.
Regarding Flickchart. Flickchart is actually one of the websites I mentioned earlier that I have an account on, but I don't use at this point. And I think because I really like the concept, but I was frustrated with the fact that it's not actually that precise, if I remember correctly, because sometimes I would find that films were not quite ranked in the end in the big global lists in the way that I wanted. And so I guess that kind of frustrated me. And as Chris mentioned, it's a lot of work to actually get your big list right to work. So I kind of abandoned it, even though the concept seems really cool. And once you've got it set up, I guess it's pretty fun to use.
Yeah, definitely. Though it would be interesting if it was every one website to actually combine all of these features into one, in which case the rest would not really be necessary anymore. I'm surprised none of them have done that. But to dive into each and every single one a little bit more, I mean, we're talking a lot about the IMDb already. But let's see if we can look into the positives and the negatives here a little bit more and flesh this out a little bit. And we can probably start with the positives. So besides what we talked about so far, which seems mainly focused on the advanced search, really, what are the biggest positives with using IMDb?
I guess it's the most complete database. It's very rare to have a film that is not on IMDb. I guess it does happen more for you guys who watch things that are more obscure than me, but I mean, it's a bit rare to have something that's not on Letterboxd either, but it does happen sometimes because they're based on TMDb, which is a rival to IMDb that's much less popular, I suppose. So I guess that's the main advantage of IMDb from my point of view. It's how exhaustive it is.
Aside from the advanced search, I don't think there's anything I can really say that's positive about IMDb. And I guess I also have a lot of resentment against them also with the way they've changed things and made everything so user unfriendly over the years, between getting rid of the message boards, getting rid of the ability to contact other users via the site, making it harder to sort through your reviews on IMDb. It's not a very user-friendly site, and I think if it wasn't for the database, like Mature mentioned, and being able to sort by things on there, I don't think I'd actually have any use for it, unfortunately.
This got dark very fast. Let's see if Tom has some words of encouragement to the IMDb owners.
I absolutely love the trivia section. And I know that anyone can edit it and submit their edits into it, but
yes,
pretty much my first port of call after I watch a film. I love going on the IMDb trivia page and reading through all the interesting nuggets of information that people have shared about the film. I find it fascinating, and it just builds upon the film experience. You know, you learn a bit more about perhaps the filmmaking process, the cast involved, and there's often some interesting facts. And there's one other aspect of IMDb that I'm not sure if this feature is available on Letterboxd, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. But I do find it fascinating to have a look at the breakdown of IMDb votes and how you can see the rating based on gender and age And I always find it quite interesting to see the disparity there between the voting pool. I find that quite interesting. So if it is on Letterboxd, apologies, but it's not something I've ever seen there.
Yeah, maybe it's a pro feature or something, but yeah, I've never seen it either, and it's one of the things that frustrate me. I'm also frustrated that when you sort by views or ratings, etc., you don't actually see the number of views and ratings in the search. Maybe that's not a pro feature or something I haven't really seen properly yet, but it's really hard to do that. You can actually see every single individual user that have rated something or seen it, though, which is really interesting, though. That must be very, very hard to sort through if you want any kind of actual data.
So Letterboxd doesn't allow you to sort ratings based on age groups or gender, but it does let you see ratings. So if you click on the rating for any film, it will show the breakdown of users.
Yes, I didn't mean that. I meant when you have lists and you want to essentially rank them by number of ratings.
To see the rating, because you can't sort the list according to the rating, according to the average rating, and you can sort it according to popularity. So you can sort of refilter the lists,
yes.
And also with a lot of the searches they do. So when I'm searching for films to see on streaming services, if you hover above the film, next to the film title, it'll actually tell you the average user rating. So I know anything that's got anything below 2.5, unless it's a horror film or whatever, I'd usually skip past it. So I'm not sure exactly if that's what you're looking for, but in terms of what I use it for, I find it useful. I'm not particularly interested in whether films are more liked by women over 60 or guys under 18 or whatever. I know IMDb have those filters, but it's not something that I look for because I don't think I'm like most other 35-year-old men.
It doesn't influence whether I pick a film or not. I just find it interesting to look at. I don't know why. It's something that I'm kind of always curious about. I never go on an IMDb page and think, people my age like it more than, older people or younger people, and that's why I'd watch it. It's just something that I find fascinating. It's just a stat I like to check out.
It's fun to check, and it's also easy to see if there's bots in those cases, because often there will be like women in X age group rated this one, and then everyone else has a regular rating, because for some reason IMDb has much less women than men. Something I think, we can't really tell from Letterboxd, but it seems Letterboxd is more even.
I guess IMDb being a database as opposed to Letterboxd being a social media means that IMDb is much more focused on stats, right? I mean, you can get stats on Letterboxd with Pro, but it's true that they are much less in depth, and they're also hidden behind a paywall. So that's definitely, I guess, an advantage that IMDb does have. I was wondering, by the way, I mentioned earlier that Allociné, the French website I use for theater showings, and I was wondering, what do you guys use? Do you guys use the website of the specific theater when you're going to a theater, or is there anything kind of like that for other countries?
Yeah, as you speak, for me, I just check the website of the actual theater, yeah.
Same here, I just check the individual cinema websites, but it would be useful. Maybe there is something out there available for me to, filter by cinema and by region. Although I think that a lot of the art house cinemas that show the stuff I'm interested in probably wouldn't be included in that if so, but I might be surprised, don't know.
Okay, well, I have to admit I do have another use for IMDb. I do occasionally use the showtimes feature on IMDb to see what's available. I mean, there's mainly two cinema chains I go to, so one of them's got an app, so I'll look on the app for that one, or look on the website for the other cinema chain. However, occasionally, if there's something I want to see outside the box, I will look for showtimes at IMDb. They've been notoriously incorrect at times, so I still have to visit the individual theatre website and just double check it. But sometimes it can give me useful information about cinemas that are a bit further away that might be showing something that I'm interested in seeing. So occasionally I'd use IMDb for that.
I didn't even know IMDb had that. I'm looking at it now, and yeah, it is. It looks okay, I guess. Not as complete as the one I use, but yeah. I guess it does exist.
Yeah, it looks okay, but they've got issues like with the AM PM thing. So sometimes they'll be having like a 9:30 session on there, but it's actually a 9:30 AM, but it's filtered at IMDb as 9:30 PM. So there's been a few things like that. Look, it's interesting, but I'd always double check with the actual cinema website first before going off and just like going up to pay for my ticket and say, look, it says on IMDb that it's showing at this time. So yeah, it's not 100% accurate, but it is pretty close, I guess.
And yeah, I would just like to add about IMDb that yes, I do actually check the trivia section after most films as well. And I know Saul says he's quite annoyed with the trivia section, that there's a lot of useless information there, and that's probably true to an extent. There's some trivia that's not that interesting, but you also have that feature which is, is this trivia interesting for you or not? So the more interesting ones get pushed up. That's quite fun. I think it's very useful. And I also like the connection feature on IMDb, so you can see every other version of a film and every sequel, prequel, etc. It's not always entirely up to date, especially if you look at versions. So if it's a version of X-Play, for instance, they won't necessarily have every single one there, but there's a lot of additional useful information.
I forgot about that, but I also enjoy the versions section as well, because you can see if there's been extended versions, alternative versions, and if you're not specifically interested in checking out the other versions of films, there's usually a good description of what you've missed, deleted scenes, etc., and bits that differ between the versions, and that can be quite handy.
And thank you again, Han, for bringing some more positivity about IMDb. To flip that around then, what are the biggest negatives? I think we can probably let Saul go first here, because he said he has a lot of animosity towards the dear owners of IMDb.com. So Saul, share.
The animosity is only really based on the features that they've taken away from IMDb. So that's the only things that I really have any animosity towards. I mean, otherwise, I just find it a bit useless other than doing advanced searches. I mean, the trivia can be interesting at times. Alternative versions, that can be interesting. A lot of the information can be garnered from Wikipedia and other places also. So having it specifically on IMDb is not necessarily a necessity for me. In terms of what IMDb have done, they did have an amazing message board system, which went downhill because they refused to employ anybody to moderate the message boards, and they refused to let any users be unpaid moderators. So it's basically pretty bad by the time they shut it down. But when they shut it down, they also shut down the private message system, which meant that you could no longer contact other IMDb users. So the whole thing basically turned from what was a community where you were able to share lists, share opinions, talk to people who've made reviews and send them messages, to just a simple database. And, that's sort of what it's become. And Letterboxd is sort of the opposite of that. They don't have a private message system, which is one thing which I guess iCheckMovies has over both of them. They don't have a private message system, but they have got ways of commenting on every single review. You're able to comment on every single list. You've actually got a community aspect in there. So I guess the biggest negativity for me for IMDb is that there's no community in there. There's no interaction. All it is a database of information. And unless I'm looking for something very specific that I can't search for on Letterboxd, like if I'm looking for Catalan language films from Spain, I can't actually do a search for that on Letterboxd. I can on IMDb. And this is something actually very specific that I want to get from that. I just thought I could get it from other places much easier.
I share that opinion to an extent, so I think that IMDb really went downhill when they removed the social aspect, because that was the main reason why I used the website as well, alongside the ratings. We had this big dual purpose, and the message boards, etc., were probably the main thing that took my time there. And we've had an episode about that already, actually, the decline of film forums. So anyone interested in that and so mourning the loss of the IMDb message boards essentially can go back and listen to that episode, because I think we go through quite a lot of what made them good, interesting, and what led to their downfall. Essentially, any community aspect of the site is just completely gone. I think that the ability to find lists and look at lists and the social aspects there too has decreased. So essentially all of the social aspects of IMDb is gone. It is really just a database now. Alongside, they're trying to do an IMDb show. They have like trailers and stuff on the homepage. They're trying to do some other things, but I have really not paid attention to that at all. So I don't know what people get out of that, or if that content is great, mediocre, or terrible. Have any of you seen any of that? Have you watched the IMDb show? Any of their special promotions?
No, don't think it's something I'd be interested in.
No.
I was just going to say that's a no from me also. I have no interest in really supporting IMDb or seeing anything where, they're sort of flouting themselves as the go-to people of the industry.
But regarding the social aspect that you guys mentioned, I think it's interesting to look at how different, right, the communities of IMDb and Letterboxd are. You mentioned it earlier, Chris, with the kind of gender breakdown. But from my perspective, I was never on the IMDb forum. They always had a very bad reputation, right? I understand that there was also some interesting discussion in there. But they always seemed, from an external point of view, to be kind of toxic. And Letterboxd has different issues, I guess, but it doesn't have that issue, right? Because it's a very different type of community. I guess I don't know how you guys feel about those aspects of both websites, even though now IMDb doesn't really have that social aspect.
Yeah, that's a good question, Matthew, and I guess this is a good time to move into Letterboxd. And since you brought up potential negatives first, we can do it the flip side. So we get into the negatives of Letterboxd and then we end with the positives, which is very friendly. And I do think it's interesting because before this episode, I did Google both Letterboxd and IMDb, and their descriptions could not be more different. So with IMDb, what it says is that IMDb is an online database of information related to films, television series, home videos, video games, and streaming content online. And with Letterboxd, it says Letterboxd is an online social networking service. They don't even mention films in the main description if you look at Wikipedia, for instance. So it's very interesting just how different their profiles are. And if you are lamenting the fact that IMDb lost the social ecosystem, Letterboxd has a lot of that. But they obviously do not have a forum. They don't really have the easy person-to-person communication or community that IMDb had, but they are a social media site essentially. You can reply to reviews, you can interact in so many ways, you can follow people. There's a lot of things going on there. But again, I do know that Saul has some negative things to say about that.
Okay, so while I have been celebrating a lot of what really works in Letterboxd so far in this episode, there are definitely some negatives. Probably the biggest one for me is there's a lot of unwritten Letterboxd etiquette that nobody really talks about, but it's sort of expected. So there are a lot of people who will follow you on Letterboxd, but then after a couple of days, if you don't follow them back, they'll unfollow you, which means they weren't actually interested in your reviews. They're only interested in getting a follow back, so their numbers go up. Then you've got people who go around and they like every single review that every single one of their friends has written, regardless of whether they've seen the film. And based on the timestamps, because you can see the timestamps in seconds in your Letterboxd feed, probably without even reading the reviews in the first place. And that makes me very suspicious of the whole thing. So when I'm going and I'm sorting through reviews for films, I generally don't go with the most popular comments. Unless it's a film with very few reviews, I'd rather go for recent reviews because that gives me a good mix of negative and positive reviews. Sometimes I'll just sort by most negative rating first and then most positive rating. But yeah, the popular reviews section is a complete utter mess because we've got the cool kids, in inverted commas, on Letterboxd, who've got thousands of followers, and as soon as they write a review of anything, even if it's a jokey one-line comment, it gets tons of likes, and that automatically gets boosted up to the top of the comments. And that doesn't quite happen on IMDb. I guess because IMDb doesn't have the follow back section, and it's not so much boasting how many people are following you and how many likes you've got. That doesn't quite happen. I mean, you do get the occasional reviews that are written by somebody who worked on the film and saying how amazing it is, 10 out of 10, blah, blah, blah. But in terms of, I guess, having genuine content there, yeah, the popular reviews on Letterboxd don't always reflect that, and I find that a bit of a nuisance. So that's probably my one main gripe with Letterboxd, or this etiquette, or these people expect you to like your review back. If they like your review, they expect you to like it back, and I don't do that. If I like a review, it means that I've read it and I agree with it. If I don't agree with what's been said in a review, I'll usually leave a comment to acknowledge that I've read it, but I'm not going to like it back just because there's an expectation to do it. And I guess maybe because I'm an older generation, all these people in their 20s maybe people, teenagers on Letterboxd. But yeah, I don't get that at all. And that's the one thing that's probably my major gripe with Letterboxd.
I totally agree with what Sol said there about the negatives of Letterboxd. Because it's kind of leaned into this social media aspect, you often see it becoming a popularity contest of people writing the reviews and liking reviews, etc. And it's not necessarily always about the films and sharing the love of films with other cinephiles, which is what I want to do. But it's, sometimes about the egos of certain users who just want to be the most popular, have the most followers, and get the most likes. But sometimes that'll happen, and as Sol said, the content of the reviews isn't particularly useful, insightful, or helpful. And they are sometimes the reviews that are most rated and at the top of films when you want to check through reviews. And that kind of aspect is a bit frustrating. So obviously the community at IMDb wasn't perfect either, but it was a great place for finding recommendations and reading other people's opinions about films, etc. And there was some great interactions with users on IMDb. So it is a shame that the IMDb forums have cut out. And there's one other thing that I've recalled about IMDb as well, which was they used to have this thing where they updated daily 4 or 5 links on the main IMDb website, which would be links to various blogs or external sites, which was new and exciting content, lists or features or reviews by people that were deserving of attention. And I used to love going on that every day and going through the links and reading stuff. It linked me to some great sites that I never would have stumbled upon on my own. And when I used to write content for a few blogs and publications, we always used to do our best to get on the IMDb main page. And it did happen a couple of times, and that was a great feeling. So I do miss that feature about IMDb.
Yeah, about the popular reviews and all that stuff on Letterboxd, I guess I don't mind it because sometimes those reviews are actually funny. I mean, the 1-word or 1-sentence reviews, they can be funny. And if I want in-depth reviews, I guess I don't look at the popular reviews section, unless it's for more obscure films, because you can definitely, when it's more obscure, you can definitely find, even in the popular reviews, interesting things. And then it's just the people I follow that write the reviews that interest me in general. So I guess I don't find that to be too much of an issue. And I mostly use the activity page as a home page. And regarding what you mentioned, Saul, about the etiquette, I guess I never really bothered too much about that. If someone follows me, I just look at their profile, and if I find the activity interesting, I follow them back. If I don't, I don't. And then you never get a notification for someone unfollowing you, so I have no idea, really, if people do unfollow me then. I guess I don't really pay too much attention to it. And one of the things I find interesting also about Letterboxd that I don't think is true that much on IMDb, but maybe it is the multilingual aspect. I guess when I first started using it, it was really only English, or at least as far as I was aware. And so I used it in English. But now I see a lot more French people using it, writing French reviews, which I think is kind of cool. And it's definitely true for, there's a whole Spanish language community, definitely. And, the Brazilian community is pretty big. I mean, I think that's kind of interesting to have these different communities kind of develop on their own on the website, and seeing that, I don't know, it's just kind of cool, I guess.
I definitely agree about the languages, and I don't really have a problem with people writing in other languages because I'm actually able to copy and paste a review into Google Translate, and it'll usually give me a pretty good idea of what they're saying. So yeah, I think that's absolutely awesome also.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that it's more open to other languages like that. I mean, I only read Norwegian and English, maybe Swedish, Danish, etc. as well. I don't mind seeing reviews in other languages. It's maybe a slight frustration, but perhaps we could if they were under different language tags or separated somehow. But I don't mind seeing that at all. And I think it's good that those communities can flourish if they're not comfortable in writing in English. So that's all good. I'll also agree with Mathieu that I don't really mind the popular review sections. Like you said, if there's reviews by people you follow, you actually see those first. So that's great. And you have recent and popular reviews. So it's quite easy to, like, if you follow the right people, etc., get interesting views there. It shouldn't be a big issue. And yeah, the popular reviews, often one-liners, obviously, and they can be funny, like Mathieu said. I don't mind them, but obviously it's not the best reviews that come up on top, because those will likely not be Reddit. It's always going to be the one-line reviews that get most ratings. I mean, just looking at The Godfather right now and seeing the top-rated reviews. Okay, so there's one review there on the extended list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So of the 12 most liked reviews, there's one review that actually has a couple of paragraphs, or several paragraphs, very nice for them, with over 1,000 likes. The rest are all 1-line or 2-line reviews. So it's like, if you write comprehensively, you're most likely not going to get enough likes to land on top, because that many people won't have time to read your review. But I don't really think that matters. And like you said, these can be funny.
Yeah, and it's also not as true for films that are more obscure. The more obscure a film is, generally, the fewer of these jokey reviews you get, and the more long reviews will be available in that section. So yeah, I generally only check that section when it's a film that I'm like, oh, what are the 100 other people who have seen this on Letterboxd? Is there someone who has written something interesting about that? And what Sword mentioned about using Google Translate, I never do that because I don't like Google Translate, but I probably should, because it's interesting to see like the perspective of like someone from Iran on an Iranian film. That's not something you get from other places, or at least not very easily. So I should probably do that at some point.
But just to be clear then, so with Letterboxd, the only negative we can really talk about here is the popularity contest and the I follow you, you follow me back aspect. There's nothing else that strikes you as annoying or negative in any way.
I guess the fact that some of the features we mentioned are hidden behind the paywall. It's not a very steep paywall, right? I think $20 a year, something like that. But it is a paywall, right? So that can be annoying, I suppose.
Also, Sol touched upon it briefly, but the inability to direct message certain users is a bit frustrating. Having to comment on someone's reviews, etc., to spark up a conversation, whereas that's available for everyone to see. You might just want to message someone individually and start a conversation with them. So I think that is one way in which the site could be improved.
I agree, obviously, with Tom about having the ability to private message would be useful. Probably the other thing which I find a bit annoying, or maybe I just haven't found the right setting for it, is you can get notifications in your Letterboxd feed if somebody comments on your review. But if you comment on somebody else's review, you won't actually get a notification that somebody else has made a comment in that. So I've potentially had a few conversations with people over the years that I've been on Letterboxd, and a third person might have jumped in and commented on something. But unless I'm the person who wrote the review, I won't get a notification about that. And what I might jam up my feed a little bit, I would like to be able to get the notification.
And of course, it doesn't have a trivia section.
So I think we then covered all of negatives. Nothing sounds overly bad. So I think both Letterboxd and IMDb is coming through this fairly well. It's more about things they're missing rather than things they're doing very, very wrong. And to move this podcast in a more positive direction then, it would be interesting to hear about all the things that Letterboxd does right. So starting with you again, Sol, what's your favorite things about Letterboxd that we haven't really dived into yet?
I think I've covered most of what I like about Letterboxd so far. So just recapping, it's being able to see what's available on my streaming services, about being able to find one of my reviews from the last couple of years on my phone. It doesn't have to be on my laptop. I've got it with me all the time. But related to that, I'll just say the Letterboxd has a really great app. The app does need to be restarted every so often because the speed sometimes gets out of sync. But in general, it's a really great way of checking films on the run. If I want to find something out about a film and I'm browsing in a store, I wouldn't go to iCheckMovies, I wouldn't go to IMDb, I'd go straight to Letterboxd because the app is incredibly easy to search for, incredibly easy to find information on, and it's just, very handy.
I think we've covered a lot of the positives about Letterboxd, but I want to come back to something I mentioned earlier, which is just, it looks nice. It's just very pleasing to use. And that may sound superficial, but it's really important in a website. So I think that's one of the biggest things it has over its competitors.
I agree with Matteo. It's very slick and sleek and aesthetically pleasing. It's nice to look at, all the posters, how it's arranged. And it is far easier to use in that regard than IMDb. And I know I've mentioned it numerous times already, but obviously my favourite feature is just the ability to filter by films that are available on your streaming services. That's been an absolute game changer for me in terms of choosing films to watch. So don't think I'll be able to go without that feature anymore.
Yeah, that's a good shout out. Unfortunately, I didn't get in that early as you, so I don't get those features for free, and I haven't imported my ratings, and I don't use it as actively, so I haven't really paid for the features yet, but that package does look great. And I mean, I'm a member of, for instance, the Letterboxd, the community Facebook group and things like that too, just to see what pops up there. And you can see all of these amazing stats of, every year, what you've seen, which directors you've seen the most of, top ratings, etc., etc., etc. And it's so attractive and interesting. So if I ever import my ratings to Letterboxd and I start using it more, like I keep wanting to do, I might actually go for the pro features as well, just to get that, because it looks really great and it seems to have a lot of interesting information to offer. And just to completely agree with Mathieu, it just looks so great. I mean, I mainly use Letterboxd for lists now, not the list that I vote on the ICM forum, because like was mentioned previously, we only accept lists from IMDb and I check movies there just because of the programs that's run. But they just look so great on Letterboxd. So when I make shorter lists, etc., I always make them on Letterboxd and they look fantastic. And if we were to compare just how these websites look, Letterboxd is by far the nicest. I mean, IMDb, they're trying to update it. It still looks and feels clunky. iCheck Movies has had a 3.0 version planned for almost a decade now, I think. It looks and feels clunky. And Criticker, I mean, it looks like a website that hasn't been updated for 15, 20 years almost. It looks so damn old, and that's too bad, because I used to love Criticker. I mean, like you mentioned previously, I guess we can talk a little bit about the other websites now as well, just in the final stages of our episode, to see if there's any other websites that can really be compared to IMDb and Letterboxd in just their quality and their strength of offerings. But yeah, Letterboxd blow them all away on the issue of design. Critical is the one I'm sad I'm not using anymore. And it's again about ratings. Because one of the things that Critical did that was so bad is that once you import your ratings, it resets them. So essentially it's not going to import them as 10, 9, 8, etc. or out of 100 as they do there. They have their own kind of flow chart, and they're trying to set those ratings up so that they're on this kind of very specific curve, and then you have to re-rate everything, which is really ridiculous. And that's one of the reasons I stopped using it, and also because I deleted my ratings there to re-import them to get them accurate. And for some reason, the importing function had broken that month or year. Hopefully they fixed it at this point. And I just never went back to it. And it feels too late to get back into it now. But their recommendation feature, the ability to see, okay, who likes the same type of films as you? How did they rate it? And based on that, figure out how much are you going to like this film. That was such an incredible feature. I'm really annoyed that no other website has incorporated a similar feature to that. I know some try. I think iCheck Movies actually tried to an extent with favorites, but it's not very good. So that's the one feature I'd love to see Letterboxd and IMDb take on. If Letterboxd ever did that, I just import my ratings right away, because that feature was amazing.
I've never used Critica. Like Chris, I've looked at it and it always seemed a bit complicated, but I suppose I was always somebody who was very reticent about joining other websites. The only reason I joined iCheck Movies in the first place was because I joined the iCheck Movies forum when IMDb shut down their message boards, and everybody was on it, so I decided to go on it also. And I guess after that, I found it really interesting. And I suppose with Letterboxd also, it's something which people had been telling me for years to get on. And I think I actually got on it at the end of December 2019 because I got to the stage where I was watching films that were quite rare. The comments that were available weren't very useful. And I'd seen this amazing German film, and the only comment that was written on it was complete rubbish. So I thought, you know what? I'm going to put a review on there, and who knows, maybe I'll keep adding on other reviews. And obviously it's expanded to the point where I've now got over 3,000 reviews over a couple of years on Letterboxd. Talking about Letterboxd, something else which I do want to mention because Tom said that I should do because I've almost filled it all in. Letterboxd also has this amazing world map in its stats section. And one of the most rewarding things about logging films in Letterboxd is if you see a film from every single country, you can make your entire map green. So at the moment, my entire map is pretty much green, except I think I'm missing a couple of countries from the former Yugoslavia. But I've seen something from everywhere in Central Asia. I've seen somewhere from everywhere in North and South America. Other than the former Yugoslavia, I've seen films from everywhere in Europe. And I've seen films from everywhere in Africa except for Djibouti. I think that's the only country I'm missing. So I've got a really great green Letterboxd map. So I'm sorry to jump back to Letterboxd. Probably more jumping later on also. But yeah, the green map is an amazing thing. And yeah, getting back to the original question, yeah, I know I haven't tried Critica out or any of the other websites yet.
I also remember looking into Critica. I signed up for an account, and the feature that Chris mentions about the recommendations from similar users was the main appeal, but I just didn't find the interface friendly or welcoming. And I think when you've got a number of online services for tracking films, it just comes to a point where you can't really be bothered to get used to a new one. And, you know, unless there's a brilliant one that comes out with a brilliant new feature that I must have, the idea of having to enter in or import ratings, it just seems a bit long-winded to me these days. I'm quite happy with what I use and what I've got. One thing that I was curious about listening to Sol talk about Letterboxd again was you mentioned the German film that was the incentive for you to write a review. I'm just curious what it was, your first ever review on Letterboxd.
Unfortunately, we don't have German pronunciation police here, so I might be butchering the title. But the film I think is called Sabine Kleist, age 7. It's a really interesting film about this girl going off on her own in the world, and she sort of wanders away from an orphanage, and she spends this day wandering around by herself, and she's sort of helped out by strangers along the way, but she also helps out other kids and other things. And it's just a really interesting film. And the only review that I think was on there before my review was a really terrible review, which said, actually I could read it out over there. It says, "This movie was so weird, man. I sensed major pedo shit happening." And that was the only review on there. And I thought, I can't just leave this film over there. Actually, I put a proper review of the film on there. I'm actually looking now. It looks like somebody else has put a review in there. It might have been dated before mine. But there's a third review on there. But I thought, just with that review on there, I just thought, no, I need to put a proper review on there. And I guess that was the one that kickstarted it off for me. Chua said he actually does speak German, and what I've said sounded fine, so awesome.
Very good. And I think it's worth noting that, yes, there's another review before you as well. It's more popular than yours. It's written the same year, and it says, "I need something along the lines of that spicy meatball to jauntily proclaim every time I watch an East German film that ruins me so hard that it rips my heart out of my chest and plops it right into the ground. That's a heartbreaking bratwurst? ? So that's one of those joke reviews."
It's a joke review, but they do communicate an idea as well. I mean, not bad.
Yes, I do, definitely, I do. but yeah, so Sol's 150 to 160 word review is the only serious review on this film still. So well done, Sol. Thank you for going out of your way to give people information and opinions and content they desperately need. And as of this, I'll actually just go and bookmark this film.
To get back to other websites for a second. Yeah, Critica, I agree with Chris that the recommendations algorithm in Critica is amazing, even though, as I mentioned earlier, I enjoy beating it in some weird way. But yeah, it's weird that no one else has really managed to do it as well. I know several websites have tried to have recommendations, but Letterboxd has actually recently tried to do something kind of like that, not quite, but they have now films that are similar to on the page for a film. You have a list of films that are similar, which I guess you could kind of see as recommendations.
IMDb has that too.
but it's definitely not as precise and interesting as the critical one. And I guess I should mention, since I said earlier that there are two websites I don't use anymore that I have an account on. The other one is something called Sens Critique, which is basically French Letterboxd. It's basically very cinephile oriented with reviews, pretty in-depth reviews written there. That's why I was on there. But I stopped using it just because I guess it kept logging me out and I had to log back in every time, and it just became a bother, I guess. And it's too many websites to keep track of at once, I suppose. But if you're a French speaker, it's not a bad one. But yeah.
And yeah, I think we already talked a bit about Flickchart and pros and cons there. Are there any other film tracking websites you've ever used? I do know that a lot of people on ICM Forum actually use Rate Your Music, or RIM as it's often called, for movies as well. And they have some interesting benefits, mainly that they have genres that are not on IMDb, Letterboxd, etc. So they'll add all of these cool sub-genres that you can track from. But besides that, I use Rate Your Music for music, but I've never tracked films there.
Well, I don't, but I should mention the website I just mentioned, the French website. It's actually not just for film. It's film, music, literature, basically anything, which is kind of cool, but I never...
Oh, that's good. That's interesting, yeah.
You know, I never had the motivation to really rate things other than films. I mean, it's already taking up enough time.
Yeah, exactly. And they complement each other as well. So like you mentioned earlier, we tried to figure out, could you get by with one of them? And I guess the answer so far is like a slight no, simply because IMDb, Letterboxd, and I Check Movies have, and Critical for that matter, for those who still use it, have very different functions and strengths that make them stand out and makes people want to keep using them. Same with Flickchart too. And just because of that, we keep using as many as we do. And I think I'm in the same boat as you, Tom, in that the whole reason why I haven't gone full on with Letterboxd is just because of all that additional time and effort in inverted commas. I need to make that effort because in so many ways Letterboxd is better than IMDb. I think the three of you already voiced that opinion already, meaning that, in terms of the topic title, Letterboxd versus IMDb, Letterboxd certainly wins. I'm still slightly on the fence, but I need to just go all in with Letterboxd and get started there. And that ties me into my final question. I think most of you answered it already. Maybe I'm the only one who's going to answer positive this, but are any of you going to sign up to any new websites because of this episode?
Yeah, it's a no from me, Chris. As I explained already, spend enough time on these websites. I don't need any more.
I'm going to sign up for the French Showtime's website. No, I'm joking. No, look, similarly, like I said before, I was very reticent to get into iCheck Movies. I was very reticent to get into Letterboxd. So unless something comes along that can really offer me something beyond what my current services can do, I'm probably not likely to spread myself out anywhere else.
Yeah, I'm like Tom. I've got enough already. I'm not really looking for any other film website.
So that is just me with a half yes then, I suppose. So yeah, I will try to eventually make the effort to move my ratings to Letterboxd and maybe try to do what Saul does and log a few thoughts per film. I don't know if I'll ever have the time to fully commit to that. I don't think I will, but it's one of those goals in my head that I really want to do because I know it's so bloody useful and I always kick myself when it's not done. So maybe I'll manage to follow Saul eventually on his glorious journey there. And I would like to thank all of you for following our glorious journey, just going through these websites, the history, our likes, our dislikes. And again, while both IMDb and Letterboxd got pretty rare reviews there, we are not sponsored by either or any other websites. So these are our honest opinions. Though, of course, if you're happy with our rare reviews, you want to send us, say, a gift basket or something like that, go right ahead. And yeah, thank you so much for listening and join us again soon. You have been listening to Talking Images, the official podcast of icmforum.com.